Cooling machine guns with urine. British paratroopers at Arnhem Bridge used urine to cool overheating machine guns. Fewer than 750 men held the position against German armored divisions. They were cut off from supply for 4 days. Every water source within reach had been destroyed. Vickers machine guns required water jackets to prevent barrel failure. Without coolant, sustained fire caused mechanical seizure. Within minutes, the guns would lock. The position would collapse. Soldiers collected urine in helmets and canteens. The liquid was poured directly into the cooling sleeves between fire bursts. It worked. The guns kept firing. Soldiers began calling them piss-pot Vickers. The nickname appeared in after-action reports. It became standard procedure in water shortage conditions. At Arnhem, survival meant using whatever the body could produce. But this was only one improvisation among many. Helmets as cooking pots. American soldiers surrounded at Bastogne used steel helmets to cook rations. The 101st Airborne was encircled during the Battle of the Bull. Temperatures dropped below -15 degrees Celsius. Supply routes were severed. Soldiers melted snow inside their M1 helmets over small fires. The water rehydrated K rations and heated concentrated soup packets. The helmets could withstand direct flame, but the heat caused warping. Every cooking session damaged the helmet's structural integrity. Dents reduced its protection against shrapnel. Soldiers faced a choice: eat now or maintain protection for later. Most chose to eat. By the time supply lines reopened, nearly every helmet showed heat damage. There had been no alternative. The question was never comfort. It was whether you'd survive the night. Newspaper insulation against -30 degrees Celsius. German soldiers on the Eastern Front used Soviet newspapers as insulation. Winter uniforms were not issued in sufficient quantities in 1941. Some sectors recorded temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius. Soldiers raided abandoned Soviet buildings for Pravda and Izvestia. Pages were stuffed into boots, wrapped around torsos, layered under tunics. Paper provided minimal thermal retention. It reduced direct wind exposure, but little else. Frostbite rates still exceeded 30% in forward units. The insulation delayed cold injury. It did not prevent it. Soldiers knew this. They used the newspapers anyway. Wehrmacht field reports documented the practice throughout winter, 1941. It continued until proper equipment arrived in 1942. For many, the equipment came too late. The cold killed more efficiently than bullets. But soldiers in the Pacific faced a different, invisible enemy. Soap-plugging fuel leaks. British long-range desert group patrols used soap bars to seal fuel tank punctures. Operations required vehicles to travel over 1,000 kilometers without resupply. A single bullet hole could strand an entire patrol behind enemy lines. Soap was pressed into puncture holes and allowed to harden under desert heat. The seal was temporary. It held long enough. Patrols monitored the patches constantly. As soap degraded, they reapplied. The method was taught in desert training courses. Standard-issue soap bars were carried specifically for mechanical repair. Not hygiene, repair. If soap contacted hot engine components, it could ignite. Patrols accepted the risk. The alternative was abandonment in the Sahara. The technique saved multiple operations from failure. But in Normandy, improvisation took a different form. Helmets on sticks to draw snipers. Allied soldiers in Normandy used helmets mounted on sticks to locate German snipers. Hedgerow terrain provided perfect concealment for long-range shooters. Officers were targeted first. A helmet was placed on a rifle or branch and raised above cover. If the sniper fired, the muzzle flash revealed his position. Tank crews could then suppress the location. The method required precise coordination. Bait teams had to expose the helmet long enough to draw fire, but not so long that the sniper recognized the deception. Experienced German snipers learned to withhold fire. Allied units responded by raising multiple helmets simultaneously. This forced engagement or allowed safe movement. The practice was formalized in field manuals by mid-1944. Officer casualties in static positions decreased, but the snipers adapted. They stopped shooting helmets. They waited for movement. In Paris, different weapons required different solutions. Bread used to clean rifle barrels. French resistance fighters used bread to clean captured German rifles. Proper cleaning kits were unavailable during street fighting. Brick dust and plaster fouled rifle actions during combat. Bread was compressed into dense balls, pushed through barrels with improvised rods. The crumb texture absorbed powder residue and dislodged debris. Multiple passes were required. The method risked leaving organic material that degraded accuracy. Moisture in bread could cause rust. Resistance units had no access to gun oil or regulation equipment. The alternative was inoperable weapons. They used bread. Interviews with FFI fighters documented the practice after liberation. It allowed continued use of weapons through sustained engagements. Once Allied supply lines opened, the practice was abandoned immediately. But bread couldn't solve every problem. On the Eastern Front, the enemy was exposure itself. Grease and fat. Against the cold Soviet soldiers applied animal fat and mechanical grease to exposed skin. Siberian divisions used goose fat as standard issue. When animal fat was unavailable, engine grease was distributed. The layer reduced direct wind exposure. It slowed heat loss from facial tissue. Frostbite rates decreased in units employing the practice, but the coating had to be reapplied every few hours. It attracted dirt. Soldiers couldn't eat or drink without removing it. Removal itself risked cold exposure. German prisoners reported the practice after capture. It was integrated into Red Army winter survival training. During extreme cold, grease application became mandatory in forward positions. The smell was unbearable, the discomfort constant, but the alternative was tissue death. Soldiers learned to tolerate what kept them alive. In the Pacific, survival meant tolerating something else entirely. Cigarette smoke to fight mosquitoes. Allied soldiers in the Pacific used cigarette smoke as mosquito repellent. Malaria infection rates in New Guinea exceeded 50% in some units. Standard insect repellent supplies were insufficient. Soldiers smoked continuously during dawn and dusk. These were peak mosquito activity periods. Smoke provided temporary deterrence within immediate proximity. Nothing more. The practice increased respiratory illness. Nicotine dependence became widespread. Soldiers without cigarettes used smoldering plant material. Malaria remained the leading cause of non-combat casualties. Medical officers documented the trade-off. Immediate risk versus long-term damage. The choice was already made. Smoking rates among Pacific veterans remained elevated after the war, but during the war, cigarettes meant one more day without fever. One more day conscious. In the jungle, consciousness itself became a tactical necessity, especially at night. Weapons tied to the body at night. American soldiers on Guadalcanal tied rifles to their bodies during sleep. Japanese forces conducted nighttime infiltration to steal weapons from foxholes. Soldiers waking without weapons were killed before they could react. Rifles were lashed to wrists or ankles using bootlaces or wire. The restraint ensured physical contact if the weapon was moved. Some soldiers slept gripping the rifle stock. They never let go. The practice caused physical discomfort. Sleep quality deteriorated. Chronic exhaustion became widespread among frontline infantry, but exhaustion was survivable. Waking up unarmed was not. The tactic was formalized in unit standing orders by late 1942. It reduced weapon theft incidents. It did not eliminate infiltration attacks. Soldiers learned to sleep differently. One hand always on the rifle. One part of the mind always awake. The war taught them that even sleep was no longer safe.